In this video, we're going to be using existing clothes as a reference for making sewing patterns. So you'll need a shirt that maybe you like, or maybe a shirt that you'd want to modify. You'll need some paper. Any kind of paper will work. A lot of people like to use like the grocery bags, the brown paper bags, or maybe even some wrapping paper if you have it laying around. You'll need something to mark the paper with, and then something to cut it with. And you may want to have a ruler around just in case you need a straight edge. We're going to be making a pattern that's on the fold. So start by laying down your garment halfway on the paper and halfway off the paper. To make your first pattern piece, you're just going to want to make sure that all of your seams are aligned so that you can trace an accurate line. We're not going to be worrying about the sleeve right now. We'll talk about that in a little bit. We're just going to be focusing on the front portion of this shirt. So make sure that your side seams are good, your shoulder seam here, and then you'll want to kind of tuck this back piece away so that we can trace the neckline. Okay. And I like to trace about a ½ inch away. You can measure if you like, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to eyeball it. I know that I like to have about a ½ inch away. So we can kind of do dotted lines. You can do some dashes if that helps. We will trace it all later. And when it comes to the sleeve, you'll just press down your finger and kind of lift up the excess fabric of the sleeve and continue to draw your dotted lines. Find another spot, press it down, make a dot, find another spot, make a dot, and you can come back and kind of trace that in with your dotted lines if that helps. Then we will get to our shoulder seam. You might want to straighten it out a little bit again. And remember your halfway, or your ½ inch seam allowance that you're creating here. Okay, now we're down to the neck. Start over here this time. And now you have your front pattern piece. And if you want to go through and kind of like trace all of your lines, you can do that now. And so this will be on a fold, and you can indicate that by writing it. And this is your front piece. Perfect. Next we're going to be doing the back piece, so I have it all laid out here, halfway on the paper and halfway off. Again, it'll be a pattern piece that's cut on the fold, and we can kind of do the same thing. So for the sleeve portion, you're going to want to find the seam that's under the armpit and kind of make sure that your sleeve is folded on the inside here and on the outside that will touch your shoulder. So remember, this is your neckline, this is the shoulder, and this is what would be under the armpit. And lay them out as nicely as you can. So this will be the front portion of the sleeve that we're making on the pattern first, and then we'll move to the back portion, but this time they'll be connected because we want this piece to be one piece of fabric. First we have this outer edge. This is the armhole opening, so we can make about a ½ inch line here. And then this is our underarm portion, so basically the seam ends right here. So we're going to make a dashed line like this, and then press it down here and make a dot. We're going to have to extend the seam allowance after the fact, but we can use the same method that we used before, where you're going to put a dot where you're holding it down. Kind of make sure that everything stays in place as you're doing that. And just keep going until you get to the top, or the shoulder portion of this pattern piece. This portion doesn't need a seam allowance because this is going to be, again, the fold, so we actually don't have to worry about this part at all. So we can remove this just for the moment and add a seam allowance to this line here. So where these dots are, you're going to extend it out about 1/2 inch. Perfect. Okay, next is to find the back of your sleeve and essentially do the same thing. So you're going to want to find the armhole. So this is your neck, this is your shoulder, and this is your armhole. And you're going to want to kind of line it up right where we stopped making pattern markings on the last part. So right about here, and remember this is your seam allowance. You're going to want to be about 1/2 inch away from that. That looks good to me. So and it might be a little bit different than the front, and ideally that's what we want because the back of the arm is going to look a little bit different than the front. All right, so then you can extend out about 1/2 inch. Let's use our ruler. And don't worry, all of these things can kind of be modified or cut off, or you can even retrace them and make a better piece. Sometimes I even find that when you go to sew them, you won't really like how it fits, so you'll have to modify the pattern piece anyway. Okay, so this is your shoulder or your sleeve. So you can go ahead and cut out your pattern pieces, and we can talk about how to modify these pieces to make totally different garments. I've chosen this nice blue velvet fabric, and I will show you as an example using this what it needs to cut on the fold. So you find your grain line or the selvage, whichever indicator you like to use to find which direction you should be cutting your fabric. And then you just find the edge of the pattern that says fold, and you find the edge of the fold where you've folded your fabric. And place them together, just like that. So when you go to cut this out along this line, when you open up your fabric, you will have a full piece instead of just a half for both the front and the back pieces. Now, when you're making a sleeve, you would want to cut the sleeve on a fold as well, except not on the fold. You would just fold the fabric so that when you cut it, you don't have to cut 2 of them. You can just place it in one spot on the fabric, cut it out once, and because you had your fabric folded underneath, you will have 2 in the end. Now let's say you want to make a shirt that's different. So you can use this as a base, but you can also change things. Like if you wanted the scoop of the neck to be a little bit lower, or even if you wanted the bottom of the shirt to come out longer, all you'd need to use is use this pattern piece that you created as a base. Okay, so taking your base and using it as a reference, you would kind of want to just make some dotted lines because you already have your seam allowance in here and everything. So make some dotted lines as your reference from your base pattern. Okay, so we know that this is the front, and this will be our fold. And we can use this general shape to make modifications. So let's say we actually didn't really like having a sleeve on that shirt, and maybe we wanted the neckline to be a little bit lower. So we can do that. We can start maybe the neckline here instead of up here. And maybe bring it out a little bit further instead of having it here. And let's say we want it to be a tank top instead of having a sleeve. So let's mark that in right here. I brought the armpit down a little bit too. From there, you can sort of just trace in those regular lines. Oh, and let's say we want to make this a little bit longer. We want to make it a longer t-shirt. So we can add the length here. Now, it looks like we have a regular old tank top piece, and you were able to make that from your pattern base that you made before. And then once you've modified your front piece, you'll have to make decisions about the back piece as well. Like for instance, this shoulder portion isn't going to match up with this shoulder line any longer. So you'll kind of have to make decisions about how you'll want the back to look, and just making sure that these lines match, as well as the length. So if you've modified the length of the front, you'll want to modify the length of the back piece as well. You'll want to make sure that this side seam matches as far as length. Just like you'd want to make sure that these seams match as far as length. And from there, all of your modifications, you can play around with it as much as you like until you have a garment that you really like. Have fun!